once late at night while I was at the office, I walked out to take a breath and like walk around the block because I was like, what am I doing? And I called my parents, who I'm very awful at calling all the time. And I was like, I'm sorry, I haven't called you back. What's going on? And I actually broke down crying to my dad, who, you know, that is not a common occurrence in my dynamic with my family. That is not something we do, right? And he was like so taken aback. He was like, what is happening? And I was like, I am having a really hard time. I don't like this job. I don't know if I can keep doing this. And he said to me, then why don't you just quit? And I was like, what? I'm allowed to quit? And it broke, like at that point, 30 years of this mentality that I had of like, never quit. You don't walk away. You work through, you push through, you persevere. It's all about grit, right? It was the first time that I had ever heard him or given myself permission to hear that it is okay to walk away from a situation that does not serve you. And once that happened, it was like everything in my mind shifted. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I can quit. Like, I don't have to keep doing this.
Have you ever considered quitting your job outright because you felt like you were being pulled farther and farther away from your calling? And then finding your way back through something, career change that's very different. Today, we are joined on the Abstract by Jasmine Singh, the Chief Legal and People Officer at Binti. Binti Software is helping transform foster care in America, a really cool mission, working across 500 agencies in 34 states that serve over 150,000 children who are in care. Before joining Binti, Jasmine was the DGC at Patreon. She also led commercial legal at Pinterest. She started in-house at 24 Hour Fitness, which she transitioned to, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about this, after taking more than a year away from the law to work as a spin instructor. Jasmine started her career as a litigator at a few different firms, which you've probably heard of. She can decide if she wants to name drop those or not. Jasmine, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of The Abstract.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I'm really excited to be here.
I would say, as we've gotten to know each other, that you're a mission-oriented person. We're going to talk about that throughout sort of our conversation today. When you embarked on your career as a lawyer, what were you hoping for? What did you want to pursue?
Yeah. When I started as a lawyer, I think I had two major goals in mind. One was to actually make a difference in the world, like to do something that I felt like mattered and that had impact. And that was like a tangible thing that was, you know, either bringing more rights to people or bringing justice into the world, right? I sort of was very excited about positive social impact and change. So that was one part of my desire behind becoming a lawyer and what I expected would happen. Mm-hmm. And then the other part was around learning. I loved learning. I love school. I still love school. My kids just started school and I'm in their like back to school events being like, yeah, tell me more. How does reading work these days? How does math work these days? And so when I started practicing, I just was so excited about the prospect of learning how to do it right, learning how to do it the best I could possibly do.
Absolutely. I mean, I've talked with a lot of guests about curiosity being something that drives them, about the law being a practice, something that you sort of constantly need to learn and hone and gather by osmosis over the course of many years. I guess, what did you find instead, though, then?
Yeah. And, you know, I did find some opportunities to make a difference. And I did find some opportunities to learn. And I also found that a lot of the practice was going out and trying to figure it out myself, right? So like going and getting opportunities to do what I thought was important or what mattered for my career. But when you're a young associate, right, that's really hard because you're given all this work to do that the firm needs you to do. And it just needs to get done. But sometimes that work isn't actually what serves you or serves your career. So what I found sometimes was this internal tension between, okay, this is what needs to get done for me to be considered a quote unquote high performing associate. And this is the stuff that I actually think is cool and maybe I want to do one day. And there was always a divide, not always a divide, but often a divide between them, right? And in the work that I was doing, I did find some learning. And when I was an early associate, I got really, really lucky in that I had some partners as a first year associate say, you're going to take and defend depositions. And I felt so proud because that wasn't a common experience at that day and age, especially. And so I felt like, oh my gosh, this is an incredible opportunity to learn. But then as years went on, it wasn't always consistent that I was being invested in that way, or that I was finding work that was both satisfying and, making a difference. It sort of was like, I'm doing this because someone told me to do it and they're going to judge me on how good I do it, not because I actually care or because I know that it will teach me something or that I know it will make a difference in the world.
Sure. And your ability to build a client for it too, probably.
Yes. Yeah. That was a huge part of it. Yeah.
What was I don't know if I'd characterize it as a breaking point or inflection point, or when did you know that you needed to take a break? And I'd imagine that was like pretty hard to do because you've cultivated this identity for yourself.
Yes.
And people who go through layoffs, et cetera, deal with this as well. It's like you're stepping back from something and now you have to sort of be Jasmine as opposed to be Jasmine, the associate at big name law firm that everybody understands.
Absolutely. Yes. There is so much there that I want to talk about. And I'll start by saying, Tyler, it absolutely was a break. Like it was a breaking point for me. Like I reached the brink. I was at my very edge and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And it was a combination of a few things. One was I was working like bananas hours. And I mean like until 4:00 in the morning every day. Sure. It was, my health was, I had like all these issues. I was sick all the time. And it just really took a physical and mental toll on me. And then, the mental toll got really tough to a place where I was like, I am not leveraging any of the things that make me me. I'm not, and any of the things that I had sort of historically thought of as my superpowers, they didn't actually get to come into play in my day to day. And as a matter of fact, I had to hide so many of them, like my personality, my spunk, my happiness, right? All of that stuff isn't necessarily helpful when like what you're being told to do is like write a brief in a quiet, dark room and, like make sure that it gets filed on time, right? Like those things don't necessarily help that. And so I just felt like there was this internal break for me where it was really clear that the work I was doing did not align with who I wanted to be in the world. And I actually started to believe that I wasn't good at being a lawyer. I was convinced that I didn't know how to be a good litigator, that I wasn't a good writer, that, I had to work until 4 a.m. because I needed to, do the most to get the best results and reviews. And I think some of that also was like cultural misalignment. I was working in places that didn't necessarily value all of the things that I had to bring to the table. And I was doing work that simply didn't need them. And so I truly reached a breaking point where I was just like, I don't know that I can do this anymore. And it was really hard, especially being the daughter of immigrants who, their whole lives, they worked jobs that maybe they didn't like or that didn't help them achieve their potential. Right. And they put their heads down anyway, and they did it because they had to. And I 1000% adopted that mentality. I was like, I don't have a choice. Like I have to do this work. This is how life goes. You just put your head down and you do hard stuff and you make your way through it. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about making a good life for you and your future self. And I also had so many loans that I had to pay back from, undergrad and law school and, and that also weighed really heavily on me. And I share that really honestly and intentionally because I want to speak to people who feel like they don't have a way out, because I, for a very long time, felt like I didn't have a way out. Like I didn't have a choice but to do work that was unsatisfying in an environment that was really tough because I didn't know how to look up and know that it was all going to work out okay.
Yeah. And I mean, to play like armchair psychologist for a second, you've listed all these things. It's not just one thing. It's not just, I have a bad boss, so I'm going to quit, or I'm having to work until 4 a.m. 2 weeks a year, and I've decided that makes me unhealthy, right? It's like all of these things at once.
Yes.
I'm sure it's really hard to be in the headspace where you can sort of sit back and think a little bit more dispassionately. Is this who I want to be? And is this what I want to be doing with my life?
Totally. Yeah. And, thank goodness for friends who, came to me and said, like, this doesn't seem right? Like, we know who you really are in the world, and your job has never matched who you are. And there's like a fundamental misalignment between those things. And it's like, I was chasing this abstract notion of success, whatever that was supposed to be at the time for a big law litigator and, all of that. But it really took, to your point, the sobering advice from somebody on the outside to say, hey, you may not be seeing this, but we are seeing it. And did you know that actually you don't have to live this way? Right. And my brain couldn't even get there without somebody else coming in and saying that to me.
So two, I guess, sort of like follow-up questions there. Like, one, you start to realize that. How do you put it into action? Like, how does this lead to you deciding I'm going to take a year? It could have been 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, but I'm going to take time away and I'm going to go and try something very different. And then two, I'd love to hear more about, family and friends and folks, because I think that when people decide to go and do something very different, they think that they're going to run into a lot of opposition from their peer group, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was your experience or not, but I'd love to hear about that. Like, what did you actually find your friends and family and other lawyers and folks said to you?
Yeah. There were two major things that made a difference for me in making this decision. One is once late at night while I was at the office, I walked out to take a breath and like walk around the block because I was like, what am I doing? And I called my parents, who I'm very awful at calling all the time. And I was like, I'm sorry, I haven't called you back. What's going on? And I actually broke down crying to my dad, who, that is not a common occurrence in my dynamic with my family. That is not something we do, right? And he was like so taken aback. He was like, what is happening? And I was like, I am having a really hard time. I don't like this job. I don't know if I can keep doing this. And he said to me, then why don't you just quit? And I was like, what? I'm allowed to quit? And it broke, like at that point, 30 years of this mentality that I had of like, never quit. You don't walk away. You work through, you push through, you persevere. It's all about grit, right? It was the first time that I had ever heard him or given myself permission to hear that it is okay to walk away from a situation that does not serve you. And once that happened, it was like everything in my mind shifted. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I can quit. Like, I don't have to keep doing this. And then the second element that was very helpful was he was my fiance at the time, my husband now. He is definitely the polar opposite of me. He's one of those guys that's just like, no, you should always do stuff that makes you happy. Like, you should just, find stuff that serves you and do that. And if you don't like something, like, who cares? And so his voice was constantly like, you're going to be okay. Like, you're going to figure this out and you can totally walk away from this. And, he would say things that also would probably appeal to my very logical, mathematical mind. He'd be like, did you know that for the number of hours you work at this job, you could work 2 full-time jobs and make more money? And I was like, oh, like, he was like, literally, you could just go get 2 jobs and probably be less stressed out than you are right now. And I was like, okay, now I just feel dumb. Like, you're making me feel like I can't even believe I didn't see all the cloud, right? It was like everything was in front of me. So knowing that I had that support, and this really speaks to privilege too, right? Like, because he was like, you can come stay with me. Like, I will cover your rent for a few months while you figure this out. And, that was a really big concern for me, living in San Francisco with all that debt and like not totally sure how I was going to manage and where I was going to live and how could I just quit with no plan, So I was very privileged in that I had his support in making a really tough decision.
So how did you find your way back to the law then? Right. I mean, if you've built up, you've said, I'm going to I'm going to quit this. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go and I'm going to try something very different. You're working as a spin instructor. I noticed the Peloton behind you as well. For those who are listening on audio. So you still keep it up, it seems.
I do. Yes.
And how do you decide, like, okay, I might want to go and try the law again, but in a different way?
Yeah. In answering that question, I actually would love to talk a little bit about the experience of teaching spin and how that informed my return. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So my husband actually at the time was living in Las Vegas, which, you could like stop the story there and be like, what? Like, how did you in San Francisco and he in Vegas? So I put all my stuff in storage in SF and I drove my car with like one suitcase to the summer of Las Vegas. And I was like, what am I going to do? I didn't have a plan to go there and become a spin instructor. I just got there and was like, oh my Lord, what have I done? Like, this was an awful idea. And so I started to just make lists of like, what do I love to do? What do I enjoy the most? And fitness and health and wellness has been a huge part of my life. I grew up playing sports. I've loved working out. I've been a dancer. And so I was like, okay, I think I should do something that actually serves something that I know I love, as opposed to something that I feel like I've been chasing this abstract notion of success. So I just looked around for spin studios that were in the area. And I went to all of them and I said, I love fitness. I'm a dancer, so I have a good sense of rhythm and music. Will you hire me? And some of them flat out were like, no, because you need to be certified. And that's not how this works. And I was like, oh, okay. But there was this one studio called FSY. I don't know if it's still around, but look it up if you're in the Vegas area. And they have an in-house certification program. So I went through their certification program and I started teaching every morning at 6 a.m., which was, everybody.
Instead of bedtime.
Yeah. And so I was doing the opposite of what everybody else in Vegas was doing, right? I was not partying. I was going to bed early and waking up at like 5 a.m. to make it to my spin class on time. And I kid you not, it was the best job I had ever had. And I found that that was true for a few reasons. One is people were thrilled to be there. Even the people that were like, oh, it's 6 a.m. I can't believe I'm doing this. They're tired.
Sure.
They were energetic about the task. They were excited about the music. They were smiling. They were laughing. They all said thank you after class. They were high-fiving. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am making a difference in these people's lives. Like, going back to what we talked about, like my personal goal, like every single day I made a difference in somebody's life and they thanked me for it. And it just felt like, oh my gosh, how do I get more of this? And being part of a community was also another thing that I felt like I was reminded I needed in my life. To be a part of a group of people that are working towards a common objective. It just was this reminder of, the glory of being on a team. And so when I started thinking, I knew I wasn't going to stay a spin instructor, right? Like, I just was like, I care way too much about success, if we're being honest, right? Like, I'm very honest about that. To like,
some of those influencers, though. No.
Oh, totally. And I don't mean success in terms of like, spin instructors are incredibly successful. I mean like my own like legal success, like my own definition of what that means to me. And I was like, I quit being a lawyer, but I quit being that kind of lawyer. So I think I should try again. And I think I should try to not be a litigator, and I should try to go in-house, because in my mind, I wanted to be a part of a team that was building something. That to me is what a company is doing. And I want to be a part of something that's mission oriented and that's making a difference every day. And again, that's part of like being an in-house lawyer, is like you're actually helping to grow something. So that's kind of how I found my return, was very inspired by what, the law had maybe not given me early on, and then what spin did give me.
Sure. 24-hour fitness in some ways then, as a return to being a lawyer, makes a lot of sense and is a perfect fit.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, though, is and maybe it's a little bit different these days with lots of layoffs in tech and remote work and such, but having a year sort of gap on your resume or a year of not being a lawyer. I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world for a lot of folks to go in-house from the law firm directly, let alone, right, from something that is very radically different.
Yes.
How did you convince them to hire you, other than to force your personality? And
well, getting your foot in the door is impossible unless you have a connection. And I say to everybody, like, getting a job in-house, period, is very hard. Getting one as a litigator to not be a litigator, very hard. Getting one as a spin instructor living in Las Vegas, impossible. And so, I mean, I spun my wheels for like 9 months. I applied to all these jobs. I tried all this networking, and people were kind of like, thanks, but no thanks. Right. And I just knew that I wasn't going to get the job like by applying to a posting on the internet, or, by like trying to get a friend of a friend of a friend who didn't really know me to put in a good word. So I really leveraged my personal network as best as I could. And it just so happened that one of my former coworkers from when I was a baby lawyer was in-house at 24 Hour Fitness. And he and I had actually worked on a consumer class action in defense of 24 Hour Fitness when we were at this law firm. So I was familiar with them and their in-house team from the days of representing them. And this person knew that he was going to be leaving his job and suggested that I apply. And that is 1000% the only reason they interviewed me. They would not have, and I know this, I'm honest about this, right? Like, they would not have interviewed me if he hadn't said, interview her, she's good, right? And then the rest was up to me. And then I was sort of like, okay, now I need to go in and convince these people that I can do this job, even though I have not ever done this job. And I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that if you feel like listeners.
Please do. And I think this is also such a great reminder. I mean, look, usually when you're hiring someone, you're hiring them to do something that they maybe have not done, at least in its entirety before, right? Like, you usually don't want to hire someone to do a job that's 100% things that they've done for the past 7 years, because then there's going to be no growth for them. They're not going to want to grow with you. But this is a great reminder also to folks to look at people who have maybe slightly different backgrounds than they would expect in a variety of ways, because I'm sure in retrospect, for a company like 24 Hour Fitness, you're a GC of, a hot tech company. Like, you're a huge catch for a company like that in retrospect, I guess is what I'm saying.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's a great reminder for folks to like take a chance on people who look slightly different or have slightly different backgrounds.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit more about how you positioned yourself as you were interviewing. I think that's a really interesting place to explore. Yeah.
So I went back to that theme that I have had in my whole life around learning. And I told them, look, I am the most eager learner you will ever meet. And I'm also an incredibly fast learner, because being a litigator means you are a subject matter expert in every single case you're litigating. And oftentimes, it's like 5, 10 at the same time. And so I sort of proved, I was like, all I do is learn how to do stuff very quickly and at a very high level. So if you've got someone that's willing to teach me contracts and willing to teach me transactional work, or, what it is to be in-house, I am the person you want on your team, because I will learn to the nth degree. And it's funny because I always go back to like child sports, like growing up, like when I played basketball for a long time. And I, in junior high, would always win the most coachable award. And at the time, right, I was like, that means I work hard and I listen good. But as an adult, I'm like, what that really was me being like, I am always going to take what you tell me and put it into practice in a way that like makes sense and is productive. And so leveraging that, actually, when I went into the interview with the hiring manager, with Rob Shantz, who I like shout him out all the time. He's like the best mentor and teacher. He was a basketball coach. And so I basically was like, put me in, coach. Like, I'm going to be your best, shooting guard that you've ever had. I just need you to be willing to invest the time. I will do the reps. I will be in the gym every day at 6 a.m. I will be the one in here working when nobody else is, right? Like you want me on your team because I'm going to make you look good, right? And I'm not going to give up. And that dynamic for us actually really worked because it is how we forged a really strong relationship where he was willing to spend all that time with me. And the reason I shout him out is it was day in and day out of him and me in an office and me redlining and him looking at it and redlining on top. Or literally, he's so good that I would like start redlining and be like, I know what you're writing, but also you want to write it this way. And he could just like rattle off, like he could write a contract like dictating if he had to. That like literally he does not, he knows the boilerplate by it. Yeah, yes, he could. And so he just spent so much time with me, teaching me and being patient with me and, investing effort in me, which it has paid me dividends since then because it gave me the confidence at the time that I knew how to do the job. But more than that, it has given me the confidence all these years later that I'm like, I can do contracts in my sleep because of Rob. Like any contract, like give it to me and I'll figure it out because I understand the fundamentals of how they work and I understand how to be creative and how to problem solve.
The Abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at spotdraft.com.
Was the evolution into tech then after 24-hour fitness, we move into tech, was that on purpose? Was that driven by circumstance? And let's like pull on this thread a little more, right? Like you were able to position yourself, okay, this is what I learned being a litigator, or these are the sort of skill sets underlying being good at that can also apply here. Is it a similar sort of playbook to move from a company like 24-hour fitness into tech? I mean, I'm sure people come to you all the time and say, how can I break not just into an in-house role, but break into tech? Yeah. Curious about that too.
Yeah. So the move for me was intentional in that I did know I wanted to try my hand at tech. And I also wanted to stick with this mission-driven company, things that inspire me. And Pinterest's mission is to inspire people to live a life they love. And that also is my life goal, right? Like, and for me to do for other people, but also myself. And so I just felt such strong alignment. I'm also like a huge pinner. I'm a big user of the product. And so it felt like another moment where I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the job and this is the one. And the hiring manager, another person who's a huge mentor in my life, Jess Finkelstein, I also shout her out a ton. She had the mentality of like, you don't need to have worked in tech to be successful in tech. So she didn't limit how she was recruiting, which really helped me. And so I did exactly what I did the first time I went in and I pitched and I said, look, I've done every single flavor of contract. They're not different at tech companies than they are at 24-hour fitness. And the breadth, and what was really cool for me is the breadth of work at 24-hour fitness really served me well because yes, it's a gym, but it's also a lessor of manufacturing equipment. It's also a lessor of goods, including food. It's also a real estate related company, right? It's also an employer of 20,000 contingent workers across the company. So it's also the creator of a tech platform because they have an app too. So literally I was like, no, I have done everything you could possibly imagine under the sun. There is nothing that I haven't done that you guys do. Maybe ad sales, but like I can learn that, right? And so I sort of made this pitch to the team and they had really cool hypotheticals at interviewing where they were like, okay, if you were to negotiate this kind of agreement, how would you issue Spot versus this kind of agreement? How would you issue Spot? And, afterwards people were like, we were so amazed that you could just like do that. You gave the best answers. And I was like, yeah, because that's what I did like all the time. And so for anybody that's looking to break into tech, like the advice I always give is really put very specifically out there how what you have done either is the same as what they're doing or serves you well in figuring out what they're doing very quickly. Because that line is always the fastest one to someone saying, oh, it may be different, but I understand. And once they understand, they feel like it's an easier path in.
You talked a little bit about how Pinterest mission was really important to you. And then you go to Patreon and now Binti. And as you've sort of moved through these different tech companies and taken on new roles, would you say that the mission of the business has been something that is the most important thing that you weighed, or one of the most important things that you weighed? And I'm always curious to hear from folks, like, how do you weigh that against maybe like the opportunity to grow in the next role, or the opportunity for a title, or frankly for comp too, right?
Yeah.
Like how have you thought about that as someone who knows now, like, hey, mission is something that's very important to me?
Yeah, I'd say mission and people for me are the most important. I am the type of person that has to care about what I'm building. Otherwise, I'm not motivated as highly as I might be otherwise. Sure. Yeah. I take a lot of pride in my work, right? Like I spend a lot of time doing it, and I want to go out in the world and say, like, this is what I'm doing, like, or like be a, galvanizing force behind whatever the company is, or, I always encourage people to use whatever product it is that I, am helping build and the company.
Sure.
So mission matters to me because of how I am built in terms of like, making a difference and making an impact. Like, to me, the mission of the company is one of the avenues or vehicles for me to do that. People, like, I have to work with people who allow me to be myself, and where I don't have to hide, where I don't have to code switch, where I can dress how I want, talk how I want, be how I want, right? Like, I spent a lot of years hiding when I was in law firms, right? I spent a lot of years pretending to be somebody that I wasn't, talk a way that I didn't, right? Like, and that takes a major toll. And once I stopped, I was like, oh, thank goodness. Like, this is so liberating. And so I need to be around a group that is, similarly minded, where it's not about sort of putting on airs. Like, you can be yourself, you can make mistakes, you could say, oh man, I really messed that up, but like, I'm going to do it better next time. And so those two things I think are equally important. And then, the growth opportunity, yes, I think that matters, because I am somebody that continually likes to learn and grow and challenge myself and do different things. But I don't think I would ever choose hyper growth alone if it meant I had to sacrifice to those two other things that I think mean the most to me.
Tell us a little bit about Binti's mission. I tried to explain it just in the intro, but I probably didn't do it full justice.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty good. So Binti makes software for child welfare agencies to help with the foster and adoptive care process. So where we started was with a tool that helps foster families get licensed. So historically, that licensing process was all done via paper, pen, PDFs. We digitized the process so that families can apply more easily, and so that social workers on the receiving side can process the paperwork, follow up more easily. Over the years, we have built more products that support the full life cycle of the foster process. So how we manage, how social workers can manage where children are, how to make sure that they are able to be placed with families in a timely and efficient manner. But what we're really indexing on is moving child welfare upstream. So how do we help support children in not being removed from their homes in the first place, right? How do we make sure that families who may be in danger are getting access to resources and support so that we can prevent the removal of home or children from homes? And also, if there is no other choice than, removal, how do we make sure those kids stay with people in their communities, with their family members, with their next of kin, with extended, relatives or family friends? How do we make those communities tighter and make those people be able to get licensed to be foster families, as opposed to community foster families, right? So we're really building like this full spectrum solution to try to help support this goal of ensuring that every child lives in a safe, like healthy home and has a family around them, whatever that family is defined as.
That's interesting. I mean, you always hear, I guess, in the news about how the foster care system is broken or not working particularly well, or not serving foster kids well, and it's dangerous, perhaps in some places. Are those sort of some of the biggest problems, right? That there would be earlier opportunities to sort of intervene, or I'm curious. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So Binti supports both families and child welfare agencies. Our customers are child welfare agencies, right? Like families don't pay to use Binti, child welfare agencies pay, and there is sort of an outward facing tool. And the hope is that by having the data that Binti helps digitize and collect and present to the social worker more easily, is that it's not as hard for them to make informed decisions about how to license, when to license. So that process, Binti is not involved in the actual licensure safety determination. That is still the social worker. But our hope is that by way of being able to better organize the data, the information, the documents, that things aren't slipping through the cracks, that people are aware of the choices and opportunities and issues that might come up. And so really presenting them with a piece of technology that makes it easier for them to do their very, very hard jobs is our goal.
Sure. What are you most proud of having accomplished during your tenure at Binti so far?
Yeah.
Or your team?
Yeah. So two things that I'm really proud of. One is I supported on the rollout of our family finding product, which is a product that actually helps social workers locate what I was just saying, next of kin for children, so that they don't have to be placed in community homes. So if, for example, a child was removed from their home and a social worker is just not aware of next of kin, they can use this platform to build a family tree, go do research on who is connected to this kid, find out, where they live, what their phone number is, and say, hey, your third cousin's son was removed and they don't have any other family. Are you willing to take them on and become licensed to potentially support or be a placement for them? I was really proud of being, involved in that product rollout, just because to me, it's really important that we keep families together in some way, shape, or form, so that children, feel loved and supported in the best ways possible. So I was proud of that. And then more on like the enterprise side, I was promoted to chief legal and people officer just a few months ago. And I feel like, while again, that was sort of like this, traditional notion of success and promotion, the part of that was really satisfying to me was the part that makes me feel like I was making a difference at the business. Like I was doing something right, such that I was like being recognized almost for, okay, I have a perspective on how to run a good company, how to make people happy, how to think about, employment and community and culture and those kinds of things. And so I was really proud that I had the opportunity to take that work on and really lead that function.
That's awesome. Congratulations. I mean, we talk a lot on the podcast about, I would almost describe it as the transition from being like the company's lawyer to being an operator, right? Like you're like up here to the rest of the C-suite. I'm sure you were doing it for a long time before the promotion, but that's a great, great recognition.
Thank you.
You do a little bit of philanthropic work outside of work. I was curious to hear about that too, because I think it's another expression of how maybe, people out there can go and pursue mission-driven work in other ways that aren't just like directly related to their day job.
Yes. Yeah. So in 2016, I started this organization called Dincert. It's literally a word I made up. It's dinner plus concerts, Dincert. And basically the goal was to raise money for local nonprofits that were providing direct services. And the genesis for this was in 2016, post, refugee ban, Muslim ban, we had in our Oakland community, a lot of folks whose families were being held at airports, being held at borders. We also had a lot of recent refugees that were suffering from trauma of being divided from their families. And all I kept thinking is, what can I do to help? Like, how can I get involved? And I was like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not an educator. And a lot of these people were children or, like young folks. And when I would ask around about like, how can I volunteer? Every answer I got was, can you get us money? Like, can you donate money? How can we get money? And so that was the moment for me where I was like, okay, my goal is I'm going to try to find a way to get as much money as I can for these organizations. And in my mind, I was like, okay, maybe I can donate $500, or if I'm really stretching, $1,000 of my own money, or I can invest $500 in throwing a party and convince all my friends to donate money. And then I get $5,000 instead of $500. And so that's really where it's like friend sourcing, crowd raising, idea came from for me. I was like, I can just multiply my fundraising impact by galvanizing my community and making sure that everybody knows why they're giving or what they're giving for. And so I just started throwing these Dincerts and, trying to get local bands to do it pro bono or low bono. I got local restaurants to donate food to try to keep my costs down, right? Like I was literally just paying for these parties on my own. It's also a good thing I like to throw parties.
Sure.
And so just like raising money, and now we've raised tens of thousands of dollars for several nonprofits that are, running gambit. Like we started with that refugee work and the trauma work. We've supported the East Oakland Collective, which is a nonprofit in Oakland that supports with community development. We supported a few work organizations that were doing work in Arizona around the border crisis. We've supported a nonprofit law firm in the city called Public Advocates, which does a lot of sort of civil rights, social justice work. So it's been a really fun experience for me to not just get connected to these really cool orgs that are making a difference and doing good work, but also in just knowing the power of community and people showing up to say, okay, what can I do? I'll help cook food, or okay, I'll help set up, or, I'll play my instrument, or I know this band and they'll do it for free. So it's been a really nice experience for me in like building community and seeing how people show up for one another.
That's fantastic. And no surprises that you had the sort of insight to pull that all together, given maybe like your work at Patreon, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. And that honestly, it was a draw to, so I started this far before. And then when I went to Patreon and when I was interested, and I was like, oh, all of my life has these really interesting ties that in the moments I don't realize. But afterwards, I'm like, I see common threads. Like this makes perfect sense to me.
And it's great because you're living out your life and who you are at work and outside of work. And it's not, to your point earlier, it's not like there's two different Jasmines, Jasmine at work and right. That's really great.
Yeah.
As we start to wrap up, before I've got some fun questions for you, I'm just curious if you have any final tips for folks who might be feeling stuck at work or might feel like they're losing themselves or who they want to be at work, losing the sense of mission that they thought that they had. Yeah. Tips for folks who might be in that sort of rut right now.
Yeah. Know that you're not alone. And try to find community where you can. And specifically, like if you can find other people who feel similarly stuck, create a group and meet once a week or once every 2 weeks to talk about that stuckness and what your ideas are, and hold one another accountable for coming up with, things that you can explore or think about to make a difference. I find doing that in community is so much easier than doing it alone, especially because, often myself included, sometimes I just need another voice to interrupt the spiral when it starts, the spiral of like, oh, it's not going to change. I don't know how to change it. I'm stuck, or I don't know what to do, or this is just going to be like this forever. And then every now and then you just need somebody else to be like, what about this? What if you think about it this way? So, I'd say my first big piece of advice is do it in community. Don't go it alone. It's so much harder to do it alone. And then I think the other is and this one's harder, but I think it's important, is find some kind of mentor or advocate. Find somebody who has been through something similar to what you've been through. Find somebody who, maybe is in a place where you want to be one day and ask them how they got there. Try to make a connection with someone who can speak to where you are right now and help you see a world that is different. Because sometimes I myself anyway, I needed to talk to people who were like, it was bad for me and it is so much better. And that way I could just believe, oh my gosh, it's going to get better. Or like, I'm going to figure this out, even though right now it feels like I have ruined everything.
Yeah. I love the point about community too. I think there's a lot more, well, hopefully that sort of thing is a lot more accessible to folks maybe than when you were going through all the sort of legal communities, the work that, I'm lucky to do a little bit of, right? I think that's out there and it's easier to find your peer group than it once was, and then maybe find a few folks to confide in and talk to, than maybe it was, than it once was. Okay, some fun questions for you.
Yes. Okay.
I guess the answer could be the Peloton behind you, but what's your favorite part of your day today?
Yeah, my day today, talking to you. This is lovely. And I did do a quick ride before this. I would say on my day to day, it's a combination of, my workouts, like those are the best part of my day. I love them. I love doing it. I love, beating and achieving goals and, sometimes doing it on my own or, seeing people in a class or whatever do it with me. It's a really huge, satisfying part of my day. Another really satisfying part of my day is when my kids come home from wherever they are, like school, and like they run and hug me. Like that feeling is just the best. So like, that's another really, really great part of my day.
I love that. That's a great answer. Do you have a professional pet peeve?
People that, this sounds so like annoying lawyer, but like if you mix up your and your or there and there, like that drives me nuts. And autocorrect, I know, and sometimes we're moving fast and I know. So like, I give people some grace, but like if you do it repeatedly, I honestly, like there have been times where I'm like, can we not do that? Like, can we fix that? Or it's like, let's stop. Let's use apostrophes correctly.
A teachable moment.
Yeah.
I am a big reader, and I always like to ask my guests if there's a book that they've read recently that they'd like to recommend to the audience, or it could also be something that has been important in your professional journey. Just a book recommendation would be great.
There's this book called A Practice of Groundedness. And there was like some title about like the transformative path to success that doesn't crush your soul or something like that. That sounds so lofty. But I read that book for the first time when I was feeling a little stuck. And when I was sort of like, I don't know what to do and I don't know how to get unstuck or I don't know how to get to the next level. But I actually revisit the book often when I find myself in spirals around what does success mean? What does it mean to be successful? And what does it mean to be on this sort of like hamster wheel of success? And, I'm actually like, I'm reflecting and what I said earlier about like, oh, I care too much about success. I'm like mortified that I said that because for me, success is actually not wanting for more, whether you're a lawyer or a spin instructor or whatever, right? Like the most successful people to me are those that are satisfied with their life right as it is and how it is. And sometimes I come back to this book and I need to remind myself that like constantly wanting for something different, constantly wanting for something more erodes my sense of happiness. And, there are lots of studies that say this is true for other people, but I won't be too prescriptive and say that's true for everyone, but I know it's true for myself. Yeah. And this book is a really good reminder for me. And I have, it's tabbed and highlighted in places where I go back and read it. And it reminds me like to be more present in what I am and to be satisfied in living a really fun journey and not constantly trying to succeed and get to the next level and get to the next thing. And, check off that box that's going to give me a sense of accomplishment and, the serotonin that comes along with like, oh, check this off. Now I'm done. Oh, check this off. Right. Like I'm very intentionally not trying to live that life because I think it really can take away from current state happiness, and it can really undermine the joy that can come in like the most regular things, right? Like the beauty of the world, like waking up every day and seeing the most incredible flowers on my walk to my son's school. Like, I don't ever want to lose sight of the fact that like I am very happy and lucky to have a life where I get to do that. And this book in particular is a nice reminder of how to live a life that allows for that.
That really resonates with me, and I'm sure with a lot of our listeners too, who may be very focused on comparison or extrinsic markers of success, or even things that are very good, right? Yeah. Accomplishments, but that, probably shouldn't be the thing that they're constantly focused on, or that I'm constantly focused on and motivated by day to day.
Yeah.
We will definitely put that in the show notes for folks to go and buy at their local bookstore or on Amazon.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, it's a great book. I like it.
My last question for you, Jasmine, and this is one that I like to ask pretty much all of our guests. If you could look back on your days as a lawyer just getting started, maybe right out of law school or early at one of the firms, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
Yeah. Trust your gut. Like, it's not going to lead you astray, and you're going to be okay because that gut is going to guide you in the right direction. And so many of us, myself included, spend a lifetime telling that gut to be quiet, right? Because we're like, this is what I have to do, or this is what's expected of me, or this is what I need to do to get to the next level, or whatever. Right. I wish I could go back and tell myself to stop doing that, to let that voice be loud and to listen to it. And listening to it doesn't make me, any less able to do my job, or any less committed, or any less resilient. As a matter of fact, it makes me more of those things because I can trust myself. And so I really wish I could, and this is what I try to do this for people that I mentor. I'm like, you know what's right for you, nobody else, right? And you can't tell that voice that's shouting it to be quiet, because it will only get louder over time. And you might find yourself in Las Vegas teaching spin, which, and being like, like that, this is what it took for me to listen to that voice. And for me, that was incredible. And it was incredible because I had the privilege to do it, but not everybody does.
And it worked out for you too.
Yeah. It did.
Jasmine, thank you so much for such a great conversation today and for joining me for this episode of The Abstract.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.